"Mom, could you step aside? This one's just for immediate family." The words hit me like a slap across my weathered face. I stood there, frozen in my floral dress, the one I'd ironed so carefully that morning, as my daughter Natalie gestured for me to move away from the family gathering on my grandson's graduation day. Her smile never faltered, as if she hadn't just pushed a knife into my heart. "I'm Dawn Matthews, 71 years old, and I've just been excluded from my own family photo by my only daughter." The backyard was filled with chatter and laughter. Paper lanterns swayed in the gentle May breeze, casting soft shadows across the freshly mowed lawn. My grandchildren, dressed in their Sunday best, shuffled into position. My son-in-law James straightened his tie, standing tall and proud next to Natalie. A perfect family portrait. Without me. "Sure, honey," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady as I stepped back. No one seemed to notice the slight tremor in my hands or how I clutched my purse a little tighter. I watched as they huddled together, arms wrapped around each other, faces beaming with joy. "Say cheese," called the photographer, a young man with kind eyes who gave me a confused glance as I moved to the edge of the patio. "Cheese," they all echoed. The camera flashed once, twice, 3 times. I stood alone, a silent spectator at what should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. My grandson Matthew had graduated with honors. I'd been there for his first steps, his first words, countless baseball games when Natalie was too busy with work. Yet somehow I wasn't immediate family anymore. When the photos were done, the party continued as if nothing had happened. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting plates of food I couldn't stomach, smiling at jokes I barely heard. Each time I caught Natalie's eye, she'd give me that same practiced smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. That night, as everyone gathered around the dining table, I excused myself briefly. In the quiet of Natalie's pristine kitchen, I pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying in my purse for weeks, turning it over in my hands. I'd written and rewritten the letter inside more times than I could count, never quite finding the courage to share it. Until today. With trembling fingers, I slipped it under Natalie's dinner plate, making sure just the edge peeked out. Then I returned to the table, settling into my chair as if I hadn't just made the most terrifying decision of my life. "Where's the gravy, Mom?" Matthew asked, breaking my reverie. "Oh, I'll get it," I said, grateful for the distraction. As dinner progressed, nobody noticed how little I ate or how often I checked to make sure the envelope remained in place. James dominated the conversation as usual, discussing his recent promotion and their plans for a summer vacation in the Hamptons. Natalie hung on his every word, occasionally touching his arm in admiration. It wasn't until dessert was served that Natalie finally noticed the corner of the envelope beneath her plate. "What's this?" she asked, her perfectly manicured fingers pulling it free. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. "Just something I wanted you to read," I said softly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Natalie frowned, turning the envelope over. "Mom, is this really the time? We're celebrating Matthew's graduation." "It's important," I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper. She sighed that familiar, exasperated sigh I'd heard countless times before, and tucked the envelope into her pocket. "I'll read it later." But I knew my daughter. Later often meant never. After dinner, as everyone migrated to the living room for coffee, I touched Natalie's arm gently. "Please read it tonight." Something in my voice must have registered because she paused, really looking at me for what felt like the first time in years. "Are you okay, Mom?" "Just read it," I replied, then turned away before she could see the tears threatening to spill. I left shortly after, declining offers to stay longer. As I drove home to my empty house, the weight of what I'd done pressed heavily on my chest. In that letter were truths I'd never spoken aloud, pain I'd silently carried for decades, and a revelation that would forever change our relationship. I just prayed she would actually read it. I couldn't sleep that night. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Natalie's face as she tucked my letter into her pocket, that mixture of annoyance and obligation that had become her default expression whenever I needed something from her. I wondered if she'd read it yet. If the words I'd carefully chosen had pierced through the wall she'd built between us. If she finally understood the depth of my pain. My bedroom felt especially empty as dawn broke. I'd lived alone for nearly 30 years since Harold's heart attack took him at 43, leaving me with a 13-year-old daughter and a mountain of debt. The framed photo on my nightstand showed a younger me, arm wrapped protectively around a teenage Natalie. Her smile was genuine back then, before life and ambition hardened her. I traced Harold's face in the picture, remembering how quickly everything had changed after he died. The life insurance barely covered the funeral and outstanding medical bills. Our savings vanished within months. The comfortable middle-class existence we built crumbled overnight. "We'll be okay, Natalie," I'd promised, though I had no idea how I would keep that promise. I took on 2 jobs, bookkeeping at a local hardware store during the day and waiting tables at Denny's 4 nights a week. My hands, now spotted with age, still bear the calluses from those years. I'd return home past midnight exhausted, only to rise at dawn to make Natalie's breakfast and help her prepare for school. The phone jarred me from my memories. I glanced at the clock, 6:47 a.m. Too early for casual calls. "Hello." My voice was rough with sleep and worry. "Mom." Natalie's voice sounded strange, tight with emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "I read your letter." My heart stumbled in my chest. "All of it?" "Yes," she whispered. "Is it true? The diagnosis?" I closed my eyes, remembering the doctor's solemn face as he delivered the news. "Yes." Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. "Why a letter? Would you have listened otherwise?" The question hung in the air, painfully honest. Another silence, longer this time. I heard a muffled sound. Was she crying? "I'm coming over," she said abruptly. "Don't go anywhere." Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, wondering what to expect. The letter contained truths I'd kept buried for decades, about the sacrifices, the loneliness, the gradual heartbreak of watching my only child drift away. And, of course, the diagnosis that had finally given me the courage to speak up. I moved through my morning routine, mechanically showering, dressing, making a pot of coffee stronger than usual. I need it today. An hour later, Natalie's silver BMW pulled into my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched her sit motionless behind the wheel for several minutes before finally emerging. Her designer sunglasses couldn't hide the redness around her eyes. When I opened the door, she stood there clutching my letter, her composure visibly fragile. 6 months. Those were her first words, her voice breaking. "You only have 6 months?" I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Maybe less. The cancer's aggressive." Natalie moved past me into the living room, the familiar space suddenly feeling too small for the emotions filling it. She looked around as if seeing it for the first time. The worn furniture I'd never replaced, the faded curtains, the small luxuries I'd always denied myself to ensure she had everything she needed. "In your letter," she began, sinking onto the couch, "you said you pawned Grandma's pearl necklace to pay for my senior prom dress. You wanted that dress so badly," I said softly, remembering her excitement. "Your friends were all wearing designer gowns. But those pearls were your mother's. Your only inheritance." I shrugged, sitting beside her. "You were more important." Natalie unfolded the letter with trembling hands, skimming until she found the passage she was looking for. "You turned down Richard's proposal because I told you I hated him." Richard. Even now, 30 years later, his name brought a pang of what might have been. My first chance at love after Harold died. "You were 16, I explained. "Still grieving your father. I couldn't bring another man into our home when you were so opposed. But you loved him." "I loved you more," I said simply. Natalie continued reading sections aloud, her voice growing increasingly unsteady. The college tuition I'd paid by refinancing the house. The vacations I'd skipped to afford her study abroad program. The retirement fund I'd depleted when her first business venture failed. Each revelation seemed to hit her harder than the last. "Mom," she finally whispered, lowering the letter to her lap. "Is this why you never complained? Never asked me for anything? Because you didn't want to burden me?" I reached for her hand, noting how smooth it felt compared to my own. "I'm your mother, Natalie. That's what mothers do." "But I haven't," she faltered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yesterday at the party, I asked you to step aside from the family photo." The memory still stung, but I forced a smile. "It's fine." "It's not fine," she burst out. surprising us both with her vehemence. Nothing about this is fine. I've been horrible to you, and now you're telling me you're dying. She broke down then, decades of unacknowledged guilt finally surfacing. I held her as she sobbed, this accomplished woman reduced to the little girl who once climbed into my lap after nightmares. But as I stroked her hair, a small voice inside me wondered, was she crying for me, or for the realization of who she'd become? Natalie stayed for lunch. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped her with homework, dried her teenage tears, and celebrated her college acceptance letter. Now my letter lay between us like a ticking bomb, certain sections underlined in Natalie's neat handwriting. "Mom," she said, pushing her barely touched sandwich aside. "I need to ask you something." I nodded, bracing myself. "In your letter you mentioned James." Her voice faltered. "You wrote that he never respected you." I stared down at my teacup, watching the amber liquid ripple. "How do you tell your daughter that her husband of 18 years has been systematically driving a wedge between you?" "It's complicated, Natalie. Please," she insisted. "I need to understand." I sighed, deciding there was no gentle way to say it. "It started after your wedding. Small things at first. The way he'd correct me in conversations explained things I already knew. He called it helping the older generation keep up." Natalie winced. "He was just trying to include you." "Was he?" I reached for another section of the letter. "Remember Thanksgiving 2014? You invited me to your new house. I brought those photo albums you'd asked for." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "The ones with Dad's pictures. James said they were cluttering up your beautiful home. Said I was living in the past, and you needed to focus on your future. The albums disappeared into your attic. You never looked at them again." "I didn't realize," Natalie whispered. "Then came the holidays," I continued, my voice remarkably steady despite the ache in my chest. "Always at his parents' home, never mine. His mother got the best bedroom when they visited. I got the pull-out sofa in your basement when you finally invited me. 3 Christmases in a row you called last minute to say you couldn't make it to my house after all. James had made other plans." Natalie's face had gone pale. "Mom, that wasn't intentional. His family is just more formal about traditions. He called me quaint at your company dinner," I reminded her. "When I mentioned my volunteer work at the literacy center, he laughed and told everyone. Dawn so adorably old-fashioned with her little hobbies." The memory still stung. The pitying glances from Natalie's colleagues, James's patronizing smile, and worst of all, Natalie's silent complicity. "I didn't stand up for you," she admitted, the realization seeming to hit her freshly. "I just sat there." "You laughed," I corrected gently. "You laughed along with him." Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't want to make a scene." "No one ever does," I sighed. "That's how it kept happening." I reached for another page of the letter, but Natalie stopped me, her hand trembling as it covered mine. "There's more, isn't there? In the letter?" I nodded. "About James. About how he gradually convinced you I was a burden," I said. "About how the invitations became less frequent. How my calls went to voicemail. How you started checking your watch whenever we were together. Always needing to be somewhere else." Natalie's composure crumbled. "He said you were too dependent on me. That you needed to develop your own life." I almost laughed at the irony. "I've been on my own since your father died, Natalie. I raised you alone, worked 2 jobs, handled every crisis without burdening anyone. I'm probably the most independent person you know." "But James said." "James didn't want me around," I interrupted, finally speaking the truth we'd both avoided for years. "He saw me as competition for your attention, a reminder of your roots. The small-town upbringing he spent years helping you forget." Natalie fell silent, absorbing this revelation. Through the kitchen window, afternoon light streamed in, highlighting the silver in her carefully colored hair, the fine lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. For a moment I saw the little girl who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. "Does the letter say why you never told me any of this before?" she finally asked. "Page 7, I said softly. She flipped to it, reading aloud. "Every time I tried to talk to you about James, you became defensive. Eventually, I realized that forcing you to choose would only push you further away. I decided having some part in your life, even a diminished one, was better than losing you completely. Natalie covered her mouth, stifling a sob. I watched you build the life you wanted, I continued. The career, the house in the suburbs, the social connections James thought were so important. I didn't want to be the mother who couldn't let go. The burden. You were never a burden, she whispered. But we both knew that wasn't true. Somewhere along the way, that's exactly what I'd become in her eyes. A reminder of a simpler past, an obligation to be managed rather than a mother to be cherished. The phone rang, shattering our fragile moment. Natalie checked the caller ID and tensed visibly. "It's James," she said, uncertainty clouding her expression. As she answered, I wondered if this conversation had changed anything at all, or if James's influence would once again reassert itself, washing away this brief moment of clarity like footprints in the sand. Natalie's conversation with James was brief and tense. I couldn't hear his words, but her responses told me enough. "I'm with Mom. No, I can't come home yet. As we're talking, James. Important things. I don't care about the Hendersons' dinner party." When she hung up, determination had replaced the uncertainty in her eyes. "He'll survive one evening without me." She poured us both a glass of wine, my cheap grocery store Merlot that she'd normally turn her nose up at, and we moved to the living room. "Tell me about the diagnosis," she said quietly. "The treatment options. I want to help." My stomach clenched. The moment I'd been dreading had arrived. "Natalie," I began, my mouth suddenly dry despite the wine. "There's something I need to tell you about that part of the letter." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I set my glass down, hands trembling. "The diagnosis. It's not real." Confusion flickered across her face, quickly followed by disbelief. "What?" "I'm not dying, Natalie." My voice was barely audible. "There is no cancer." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched comprehension dawn on her face, followed by shock, then anger. She stood abruptly, wine sloshing over the rim of her glass. "You lied to me? About cancer?" Her voice rose with each word. "What kind of person does that?" "A desperate one," I answered, remaining seated, feeling suddenly every one of my 71 years. A mother who couldn't think of any other way to make her daughter really see her. So this whole thing, the letter, the tears making me feel guilty, it was all manipulation? She paced the small room, gesturing wildly. "Do you have any idea how cruel that is?" "Yes," I admitted. "It was wrong. But Natalie, would you have read that letter otherwise? Would you have listened to anything I had to say about James, about how you've treated me these past years, if you didn't think I was dying?" She stopped pacing, color high in her cheeks. "That doesn't justify lying about something so serious." "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "But nothing else was a lie, Natalie. Not the sacrifices, not the pain, not being excluded from your life. Yesterday, you asked me to step out of a family photo, your own mother. That's not the same as." "Isn't it?" I interrupted, finding strength I didn't know I had. "You've been slowly erasing me from your life for years. I'm not blind, Natalie. I see how you flinch when I call, how you check your watch every 5 minutes when we're together. I hear the relief in your voice when you can end our conversations." Her righteous anger faltered as truth hit home. "Would you have ever confronted how much that hurts if I hadn't done something drastic?" I asked. Natalie collapsed back onto the couch, her anger deflating into something more complicated. "You could have just talked to me." "I tried. For years I tried." I reached for the letter again. "Page 10. Read it." She reluctantly picked up the paper. Every attempt to discuss the distance between us was met with the same response. "You're overreacting, Mom. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things." Until finally I stopped trying. Natalie lowered the letter, her expression softening. "I said those things?" I nodded. So many times that I started to believe them. Started to think maybe I was crazy for feeling abandoned by my own daughter. "I never meant to abandon you," she whispered. "Intention doesn't change the outcome, honey." I reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. "I know you didn't wake up one day and decide to push me out of your life. It happened gradually, influenced by James, by your career, by the social circle you wanted to belong to. But the result is the same. Tears slid down her cheeks. I'm so angry at you for lying about being sick. I know. But I'm also ashamed, she continued. Because you're right. I wouldn't have listened otherwise. We sat in silence, the afternoon light fading into evening shadows. The truth hung between us, uncomfortable, painful but somehow cleansing. I'm sorry for the lie, I finally said. It was wrong no matter my reasons. Natalie nodded, wiping her eyes. And I'm sorry for everything else. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was acknowledgement. A first step. What happens now? She asked, sounding younger than her 43 years. I don't know, I admitted. But I'd like to find out. The doorbell rang, startling us both. Through the window, I glimpsed James's BMW in my driveway, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Natalie stiffened. I told him not to come. Of course he came, I said gently. You challenged his control. James rang again, more insistently. I could picture him standing there, irritation building at being kept waiting. You don't have to answer it, I told her. Natalie stared at the door, then back at me. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, I saw her weighing her options, truly seeing the choice before her. The comfortable pattern of her marriage, with all its invisible constraints, or the harder path of confronting uncomfortable truths. I should talk to him, she said finally. My heart sank. Some patterns were too deeply ingrained to break in a single afternoon. But then she reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. We should talk to him. Together. As we moved toward the door, I felt something shift between us. Fragile and tentative but real. The letter had done what I'd hoped, though not in the way I'd planned. It had cracked open the carefully constructed facade of our relationship, letting in both pain and possibility. Whether what grew from these cracks would heal or further divide us remained to be seen. James didn't bother to hide his annoyance when we opened the door together. His tall frame filled the doorway, one hand still raised to ring the bell again, the other clutching his phone. The perfect picture of interrupted importance. Finally, he said, his eyes skipping over me to land on Natalie. We're going to be late for the Hendersons. They're expecting us at 7. I'm not going to the Hendersons, Natalie replied, her voice calmer than I expected. I told you that on the phone. James stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and impatience. In my small living room, he looked absurdly out of place. A designer suit amid my thrift store furnishings. What's this about? He demanded, glancing between us. His eyes narrowed when he noticed the letter on my coffee table. What's that? About everything, Natalie answered before I could. About how I've been treating Mom. About how we've been treating Mom. James frowned, adjusting his cufflinks. A nervous habit I'd noticed years ago. Is this really necessary right now? The Hendersons are influential. Charles could help with that zoning issue for your new office building. My mother is more important than a zoning issue, James. The words hung in the air, simple yet revolutionary. I fought to keep my expression neutral, but inside my heart soared. When was the last time Natalie had prioritized me over her social obligations? James's face hardened. Natalie, can I speak with you privately? Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Mom. He sighed dramatically. Fine. I think you're overreacting to whatever is in that letter. Your mother has always had a flair for dramatizing situations. Dramatizing. I echoed, unable to keep silent. No offense, Dawn, he said with a tight smile that held zero warmth. But you do tend to feel left out whenever Natalie and I have social engagements that don't include you. Natalie stiffened beside me. That's not fair. It's completely fair, James countered. Remember Thanksgiving last year? She sulked the entire weekend because we stayed at my parents' instead of coming here. I didn't sulk, I said. I was disappointed because it was the third Thanksgiving in a row I spent alone. James waved a dismissive hand. See what I mean? Always the victim. Stop it, Natalie said sharply. You're not helping. I'm trying to be realistic here, James said, his tone shifting to something placating. Your mother has always been clingy, always expecting to be included in everything. It's not healthy, especially at her age. She should have her own life, her own friends. Do you hear yourself? Natalie asked incredulously. Yesterday, you suggested I ask her to move aside for our family photo. Our family photo? She's my mother, James. She is family. I was just trying to control the situation, I finished for him. Like you always do. James turned to me, his carefully cultivated charm vanishing entirely. With all due respect, Dawn, this is between me and my wife. No, Natalie interjected. This is about all of us. About how we've been treating Mom for years. How you've been encouraging me to distance myself from her. That's ridiculous, James scoffed. I've never said any such thing. You didn't have to say it directly, Natalie replied. It was in every dismissive comment, every eye roll when she called, every excuse you made for why we couldn't visit. I'd never seen my daughter stand up to James like this. It was like watching a flower that had been trapped in shade suddenly reach for the sun. You've turned her into some kind of villain in your mind, Natalie continued. And I let you do it because it was easier than admitting I was being a terrible daughter. James's expression darkened. I think you're being manipulated here. What exactly did that letter say? He reached for it, but Natalie moved faster, snatching it from the table. It's private. Nothing's private in a marriage, Natalie. You know that. Some things are, she countered. Like the fact that I've been unhappy for a long time, but was too afraid to admit it. The words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised James and me. A truth she'd perhaps only just recognized herself. James's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. Whatever issues you're having with your mother, don't project them onto our marriage. I'm not, Natalie said quietly. I'm finally seeing things clearly, including the way you've treated my mother. The way you've encouraged me to treat her. Oh, for God's sake. James exploded, his carefully maintained facade finally cracking completely. Your mother is a needy, small-town nobody who's been clinging to you since your father died. I did you a favor by helping you establish some boundaries. The room fell silent. Even James seemed shocked by his outburst. I waited for the familiar sting of his words, the shame that usually accompanied his subtle put-downs. But strangely I felt nothing but calm. His true feelings, finally spoken aloud, had no power to hurt me anymore. Natalie's face had gone pale. I think you should leave, James. Natalie. Now, she said firmly. We'll talk tomorrow. After I've had time to think. James looked between us, calculation replacing anger in his eyes. He straightened his tie, composure returning like a mask sliding back into place. Fine, he said coolly. But this conversation isn't over. As the door closed behind him, Natalie turned to me, eyes shining with unshed tears and something else, determination. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered. I should have seen it sooner. I took her hand, feeling the first fragile threads of hope weaving between us. We both should have. 1 year later, I adjust the canvas on my easel, dabbing another stroke of cobalt blue onto the ocean scene taking shape before me. Through the open doors of my sun porch, a salt-tinged breeze carries the distant cry of seagulls. April sunshine warms my shoulders as I work, bringing out the silvery highlights in my hair. Now worn natural. No more of the auburn dye I'd used for decades trying to look less old for Natalie's social events. At 72, I finally learned to embrace who I am. The small beach cottage I now call home sits just 3 blocks from the shore in a quiet community on the North Carolina coast. It's nothing fancy: 2 bedrooms, a sun porch, and a small garden I've filled with roses and lavender. But it's mine, bought with the proceeds from selling my old house and, surprisingly, a portion of the divorce settlement Natalie insisted I accept. Dad would have wanted you to have it, she'd said when I protested. And honestly, Mom, so do I. The past year has been one of profound change for both of us. After that confrontation with James in my living room, something shifted in Natalie. Like a spell being broken. She stayed with me that night, and the next, pouring through old photo albums and asking questions about her father, about our life before James. Questions she'd stopped asking long ago. Their separation wasn't immediate. She tried counseling first, clinging to the hope that 18 years of marriage could be salvaged. But some betrayals cut too deep for repair. It wasn't just how he treated you, she explained months later, as divorce papers sat ready for signing. It was how he made me treat you. How he changed me into someone I don't recognize anymore. The doorbell pulls me from my thoughts. Setting down my brush, I wipe paint-stained fingers on my apron and hurry to answer it. Natalie stands on my porch, looking younger than she has in years despite the fine lines around her eyes. Gone are the designer suits and perfectly coiffed hair that once defined her. Today she wears jeans, a simple blouse and a genuine smile that reaches her eyes. "You're early," I say, embracing her. "Finished my client meeting ahead of schedule. Thought I'd beat the traffic." She follows me inside, inhaling deeply. "Is that your famous apple cake I smell? Straight from the oven. And I made that soup you like." She laughs, setting down her overnight bag. "You don't have to feed me every time I visit, Mom." "Old habits," I reply with a shrug. "Besides, cooking for one isn't much fun." We move to the sun porch where my half-finished painting waits. Natalie studies it, head tilted thoughtfully. "This one's different," she observes. "More vibrant." I'm using a new technique Mary showed me. Mary runs the community art class I joined 3 months ago. One of many new friendships I've cultivated here. She says I've been too timid with color. She's right. Natalie agrees. I like it. We settle into the comfortable wicker chairs overlooking my small garden, catching up on the week's events. Natalie's design firm is thriving despite the initial concerns that divorcing James might affect her professional connections. If anything, she seems more focused, more passionate about her work now that it's truly hers. "I brought something," she says suddenly, reaching into her handbag. She pulls out a familiar cream-colored envelope, edges softened with handling. "I thought you might want this back." "The letter." "My letter. The catalyst that changed everything. You kept it all this time?" I ask, surprised. She nods. "I read it whenever I start to forget how easy it is to lose what matters most." I take the envelope, feeling its weight. Not just the physical pages inside, but the emotional burden it once carried. Opening it, I scan the words I wrote in desperation a year ago, the false claim of terminal illness that finally made my daughter see me. "I'm still sorry I lied about being sick," I say softly. Natalie takes my hand. "I'm sorry you felt you needed to. We've had this conversation before, worked through the hurt on both sides. The lie, the years of neglect, the slow rebuilding of trust. None of it was easy, but all of it was necessary. Actually," I say, "there's something else I never told you about this letter." I flip to the last page where a single sentence sits apart from the rest. "I wrote this at the very end after I'd sealed the envelope, then opened it again. I almost erased it, thinking it was too much." Natalie leans closer to read aloud. "All I've ever wanted was to be seen by you. Not as an obligation or an embarrassment, but as your mother who loves you more than her own life." Her voice breaks on the final words. She looks up, eyes swimming. "I see you now, Mom. I really do." Something loosens in my chest, a knot I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there. Later, we walk along the shore as sunset paints the sky in shades of amber and rose. The tide is coming in, waves gently erasing footprints in the wet sand. Much like time has begun to soften the harder edges of our past. "Matthew called yesterday," Natalie says, referring to my grandson who's now in his 2nd year of college. "He wants to visit for a weekend. Bring his new girlfriend." "I'd love that," I reply, genuinely pleased. After years of limited contact, orchestrated by James's subtle manipulations, my grandchildren have been rediscovering their relationship with me. The guest room is always ready. Natalie smiles, then hesitates. "He also mentioned that Dad called him James. We rarely speak his name these days. What did he want?" I ask carefully. "The usual. To remind Matthew whose name is on his tuition checks." She shakes her head. "But Matthew told him he's applying for scholarships next semester. Wants to make his own way." Pride swells in my chest. "He's a good kid." "He is," Natalie agrees. "Takes after his grandmother that way. Strong, independent." We walk in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic wash of waves against shore a soothing backdrop. "You know what's funny?" Natalie says eventually. "A year ago I thought you were dying. I was terrified of losing you. Now I realize we'd already lost each other long before that. But we found our way back," I remind her, squeezing her hand. "Thanks to your letter. Thanks to both of us being willing to change," I correct gently. As we turn back toward my cottage, now gilded in the day's final light, I feel a profound sense of peace. Not the resignation I once mistook for acceptance, but true contentment. My life isn't perfect. There are still lonely evenings, still moments when I miss Harold so acutely it takes my breath away. But there's also my daughter beside me, my art waiting at home, friends who value me, and the knowledge that I finally found the courage to stand up for myself. At 72, I've discovered that it's never too late for spring to arrive, for new things to grow from old soil. All it takes is the courage to plant the seeds.